Well, welcome back again, everybody. Today, we will be discussing Uncle Tom's Cabin, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and the beatdown that occurred between two politicians in the Senate. Your guiding question for today is, why was John Brown seen as a hero to some and a villain to others? Tell why his actions were yet another step towards civil war. So let's get started. In 1852, a powerful book shook the nation and fueled the growing anti-slavery movement in the North. Harriet Beecher Stowe, a writer from New England, published a novel called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Her goal? To expose the horrors of slavery and highlight the unfairness of the Fugitive Slave Act. The novel tells the heartbreaking story of Uncle Tom, an enslaved man known for his kindness and deep faith. But his life takes a tragic turn when he is sold to a cruel slave master named Simon Legree. When Tom refuses to give up the location of two escaped slaves, Legree beats him to death. The book became an instant sensation in the North, selling out its first printing in just 2 days. Over time, it sold millions of copies and was even translated into multiple languages. However, not everyone was a fan. Many Southerners argued that Uncle Tom's Cabin didn't accurately portray the realities of slavery, especially since Stowe had little direct experience with it. Even so, the novel changed the way many Northerners viewed slavery. It was no longer just a political issue for Congress to debate, it was a moral crisis that demanded attention. Uncle Tom's Cabin played a huge role in turning public opinion against slavery, making it one of the most influential books in American history. The Compromise of 1850 primarily addressed slavery in the Mexican Cession, but it did not settle the issue in lands from the Louisiana Purchase. In 1854, Senator Stephen Douglas proposed a bill to establish government in the Nebraska Territory, which stretched from Texas to Canada and from Missouri to the Rockies. Douglas, hoping to gain support from Southern leaders, suggested dividing the territory into Kansas and Nebraska. Instead of following the Missouri Compromise, which had banned slavery above the 3630 line, his Kansas-Nebraska Act allowed popular sovereignty, which is letting settlers decide for themselves whether to allow slavery. This law overturned the Missouri Compromise, which had kept a balance between free and slave states for over 30 years. Many Northerners were outraged, fearing slavery could spread into previously free territories. Meanwhile, Southerners supported the bill, hoping Kansas would become a slave state. Rather than peacefully voting on slavery, though, Kansas became a battleground between pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces. You had border ruffians who were pro-slavery Missourians who crossed into Kansas to vote illegally, intimidate free soilers, and maintain control over the government. You also had New England settlers who were abolitionists, and they funded settlers to move to Kansas to oppose slavery. Tensions boiled over in 1856 when pro-slavery raiders attacked the anti-slavery town of Lawrence, Kansas, destroying homes and printing presses. In response, abolitionist John Brown led a raid at Pottawatomie Creek, where his group murdered 5 pro-slavery settlers in cold blood. This sparked guerrilla warfare, with both sides engaging in violent raids and ambushes. By the end of 1856, over 200 people had been killed, and newspapers began calling the conflict Bleeding Kansas. The violence in Kansas foreshadowed the Civil War, proving that compromise was no longer working. Instead of settling the slavery debate, the Kansas-Nebraska Act deepened the nation's divide. The fight over slavery wasn't just happening in Kansas, it even turned violent in the U.S. Senate. One of the most outspoken abolitionists in Congress was Senator Charles Sumner from Massachusetts. He was known for his fiery speeches against slavery, and in 1856 he delivered a scathing attack on the pro-slavery government in Kansas. But Sumner didn't stop there. He also personally insulted Senator Andrew Butler of South Carolina, calling him out for supporting slavery. Butler wasn't there that day, but his nephew, Congressman Preston Brooks, sure heard about it. Furious, Brooks stormed into the Senate chamber a few days later carrying a heavy cane. Before Sumner even had time to react, Brooks began beating him over the head again and again until Sumner collapsed, bloody and unconscious. The attack was so brutal that Sumner couldn't return to work for 3 years. Instead of being punished, though, Brooks became a Southern hero. People sent him hundreds of new canes to replace the one he broke attacking Sumner. Many Southerners believed that Sumner had insulted their way of life and got what he deserved. But in the North, the reaction was completely different. People were horrified, seeing this as another example of how slavery led to violence. The attack deepened the divide between the North and the South, making war seem more and more inevitable. Well, that is all for today. I'll be back tomorrow to talk about Dred Scott and Abraham Lincoln, which are two great topics. Now remember, the past shaped today, but you shape tomorrow. Make it count. Y'all have a good one. Bye bye.